Thank you. For those that don't know, I'm Paul Grassi. I'm Senior Standards and Technology Advisor, but I think Jeremy's been calling it CTO of NSTIC, which may make sense to you guys. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but primarily I've been in the private sector doing identity strategies and implementation for the past 10 years, and I was fortunate enough to actually be on the writing team of the NSTIC back in 2010, 2011, and I worked a lot with the private sector to get buy-in on that document, make sure that everyone's collective feedback was incorporated, and I think we did a pretty good job in doing so. So I've got a pretty rich background with this, and I'm excited to be here in this capacity. In terms of my role, I'm really here for relying parties and identity providers. You guys, the pilot slides, presentations put it best. That's why I'm really here, and it's to take those best practices and lessons learned that you're finding and applying them where I can to NIST capabilities, where we offer tools that make it easier for you, as well as bringing that back out into the private sector. I really want to be part of that easy button capability. The one thing that I've really recognized is that we talk a lot about risk and doing things based on risk-based decisions, yet on the flip side, we apply pretty draconian requirements, especially around security and privacy in government-to-government transactions. But in this world, we are doing a lot of government-to-citizen, and what's good for government-to-government is not good for citizen, especially when it comes to them using their own devices. So we really need to address that. My approach is pretty simple. It shouldn't be too surprising. When it comes to the artifacts and work streams that I'm going to do, I want them to be simple. If we can't do it, then we shouldn't write it. If we can't implement it, then we shouldn't write it. It needs to be easy to consume. 863 is 100 and some pages, and it uses words that I don't think we've ever used in day-to-day development of systems. Quick and measurable. Mission-centric, back to that point. We want to avoid undue requirements. Relying parties are the key, and it really does boil down to a business and value proposition. We're spending a lot of time on IDPs. We need to refocus on RPs. Relationships and engagement is important to me. Too often we default to RFIs and workshops to extend the process, but I don't want to really waste your time. I'd rather meet one-on-one. I'd rather put something down on paper and have you guys comment on that after the fact. And then, where we're really struggling with the topic, where we really don't think we have a good idea of the answer, then we'll go to the workshop approach. And with that said, we're probably going to have a workshop soon. So that's real quick on that. I think I've got a slide thing here to press it. So where are we today? Really want to build off where Jeremy left off. We've got a huge population of pilots hitting a very diverse user set, which is great. We're discovering that there really is a market here, that businesses can make money. Attribute providers are popping up. We used to just talk about identity providers, now it's attribute. And we've identified some of the breakdowns in policy and technology. And government is adopting, and it's adopting at a pretty good clip. And I think we're farther along than we may be getting credit for, as evidenced by some of the things Jeremy said. However, we still are not all the way there on privacy. It's still too costly to deploy. We're losing some customer centricity. I'll talk about that. There's standards gaps, there's interoperability problems. The one thing I'd like to talk about is if you go back to the strategy, there's a series of envisionments on what we think this ecosystem will really look like in the end. I don't think we're there. We're close, but we're still community of interest centric. I'd really love to see that slide that Jeremy did earlier that talked about the impact of the pilots and merge that together. So, what if we had a mashup of college students using two-factor credentials that their university issued to get access to financial services? We're not there yet, but hopefully soon. Where we've been doing a good job in identity from a NIST perspective. I would argue in these places, and based on this slide, you can see we've got our work cut out for us. For those that don't know, this is a FICAM graphic. I don't mean to push FICAM down the private sector's throat, but this is a pretty good, you can disagree about the way things are bucketed or some of these words, but it's a pretty good visual of the end-to-end world of identity and access management. We have got to improve the existing body of work that NIST has around proofing, vetting, adjudication. We've heard a lot of complaints about KVA. We've got some identity resolution issues to pay attention to. And we're late adopters in some of the more innovative capabilities out there in authentication. We have pockets of guidance and standards in lifecycle management, credential lifecycle management, authorization and access, more the authorization side in general, but it's light. And then we are completely lacking in the remaining sections up there. So I really want to take those two slides, the prior one with those road bumps, this one with the blues, yellows, and red, and spend my time focusing on those on behalf of furthering NSTIC, not necessarily making FICAM or prioritizing FICAM. So what I will end up focusing on in 14 and 15, and I've bound this, if you're not familiar with these pictures, to our NSTIC guiding principles. Codifying privacy enhancing profiles, and I have a kind of a challenge slide later on that talks about what I mean by that. Enhancing and establishing attribute standards. Standards, quotes, we don't know if it's going to be a standard or not. And this is probably where we're going to look for workshops. And this is a definite gap in government identity, and I believe it is in the private sector as well. So we will probably be very aggressive around attributes. And then portability of preferred credentials. I think the federated market understands portability as the ability to use a IDP at many relying parties, but what if I want to drop that that identity provider, go to a new identity provider and use that credential at those previous relying parties? I think it's possible, but I don't think we've got a standards-based, highly adopted model for doing that. So I'm going to start looking into that. Jeremy talked about non-person entities, so secure and resilient. I'm going to start elevating those to the forefront of our conversations. I personally would appreciate the toilet hack. I don't want to fix that. I wouldn't mind a refreshing squirt given from somebody, but the rest need to be addressed, and we are collaborating with many folks in the private sector and NIST, not only in the smart cities, but also in the public safety network. And there's actually there's a document out there on the NIST website around identity on first responder networks that I recommend you take a read and comment on. It was published before we got a chance to look at it, so I think you'll be pretty surprised at some of the content, which is why I think I'm here. But just the same, comment, and hopefully you'll replicate, if not add to, the comments that we've already made to that document. Non-intrusive security model, continuous monitoring and assessments. Those are probably future areas, but this de facto of self-asserting security compliance or manual audits, I don't think that's a good path forward, keeping in mind that we don't want to push undue requirements onto the private sector. In terms of interoperability, revisit and retool existing standards. I think 863 is first on our list, but it may not necessarily be 863 in its current form, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Develop new standards that increase IE participation, increase NIST participation in open standards, whether it's OpenID Connect or FIDO or whatever else is out there. We need to be a more active participant, not a dominant one, but an equal one and a contributing one at least. And then mobility, cloud, shared services, usability. And then on the easy to use, this is a real area that bothers me. It's still too hard to implement identity. I don't know why, especially when you look at the relying party. So we need to put out, we would like to put out a set of guidance materials, toolkits, actual running implementable reference architectures and open source code that really increases RP adoption, reduces the cost of end-to-end implementation when you look at how the government is implementing. And coming back to that smart cities example, we are looking for interesting and innovative ways to untap or to tap into innovation from previously untapped entities. We really want this group to participate in challenges like that, and I'm excited about what the product vendors that are focused on smart grid and water and utilities have to bring to this identity issue, because they know it's a problem. All right, so identity assurance. This is definitely not an exhaustive list. It's something that I've collected over the past couple weeks. I want to really get strong feedback from this group offline about what we need to do better here. But what if we just measured authentication? Performance, strength, usability. NIST's main mission is measurement, yet this is really not addressed at all in 863. This comes back to what Matt and IDESG are doing. This is another way to say trust elevation. We are very bound to a single transaction of identity vetting and proofing to align to a specific set of credentials. It's the 8-foot wall. We want to break them. I think we should break them down into the 2-foot walls in that document. What if we got rid of LOA? We are, from a policy perspective, not allowed to, because we're bound. 863 is bound to MO404, which says we have to have 4. But for the NSTIC purposes and the purposes of the private sector, and your adoption of this document as kind of a de facto, what if we did get rid of it? One has its place in the anonymous side, where you want to be able to get back to the same things you got back to, but get back to them as Mickey Mouse. 2 kind of stinks. 3 is where we really want to be in a very usable way, privacy enhancing. And 4, has very particular use cases that I don't think we're talking about with the consumer identity. What if we developed a private sector companion to 863? Dropped the notion of doing an update to that document and wrote something, I don't know if on your behalf is the right way, but did something that was an NSTIC special pub. Maybe it seeds the private sector standards process. Maybe it doesn't. I'd be interested to hear what you guys would think of something like this. And then what else can we do to turn these documents on their head? If they all borrow from each other, what I've heard is they usually take the bad from each and put it into their own. So what can we do? Obviously, we can't really materially affect the top 2 documents, but certainly electronic assurance guideline we can. Attributes, I'll spend very little time on this slide because I'm running out of time. We want to identify and establish market-enhancing attribute best practices, guidelines, and standards, focusing on metadata, confidence, liability, security and privacy, governance, and exchange to inform everything on the right. And I specifically call out performance metrics. My job is to listen to our pilots. They all said they had an issue here. I think attribute standards, attribute metadata materially informs that performance standard. So here's our challenge. We have a broker. It is privacy enhancing. It has some double blind capability, but it does not go all the way. In this typical transaction, and this might not be the best picture now that I look at it, but in this transaction, the broker does all the brokering, if you will, for the relying party and the CSP. So the broker has access to everything about an identity. It doesn't necessarily know where the identity is going. It doesn't necessarily know what credential provider they're using, but they can see their attributes. And they can see their attributes because they're encrypting, decrypting, signing, and re-signing from relying party to broker, and then they're doing the same exact thing from broker to CSP. This is not enough for us, and it's been identified by the UK as well, which has the exact same model as us. So we have some requirements we want to put out there and see if there's a way to engineer this into the existing standards that are out there and do it. Well, I'll get to the requirements. So here's our requirements. CSP and the attribute provider can't know the, CSP and attribute provider can't know the relying party. So public key encryption is not going to work because that infers they know the relying party. Broker can't see the attributes, so the current approach with the broker today is that they decrypt everything that comes from the IDP and they re-encrypt it and send it back to the relying party. Well, that's kind of that's a model we don't want to, at least at this point, promote. We may find that this is too hard and we may, based on risk, decide to back off on this requirement, but right now, when you look at what's important to us, when you look at our goal of getting away from privacy as a policy and privacy to be engineered, this is something that's very important. We want to be standard and protocol agnostic. We don't want to do something quirky or hokey for SAML and then have to do a complete reinvestigation for OpenID Connect. RP can't know the CSP either, but we may soften this requirement, but not yet. And then minimal changes to infrastructure. I think that's all on that. So that's it. I think I came in under. Look forward to talking to you all, reintroducing myself to the folks that I haven't talked to in many years, and thanks for coming.
Thanks, Paul. And I hope you all get a chance to talk to him over the course of the conference. Next, I want to bring up Nate Lesser from our National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. Here we go.
Try this. There we go. So I've been sitting on this side of the room for the morning and realized that this group got kind of short shrift, so I'm going to try and do my presentation from over here, but I need that clicker. So I hope someone will wave their hands at me if I go over. These slides I often do in sort of 45 minutes or an hour, and I don't want to give Ian too little time, although he's got an opportunity to speak to everybody later, and so he can get back at me for anything I cut him off on today. The important thing, if I end up cruising through these slides and you take nothing else away from this presentation, is please come and contribute, participate. The NCCOE, like a lot of the activities in NIST, is driven by a consumer, a customer, a business-based approach to cybersecurity. We cannot do this without the technology providers, without the industry who provide us with the challenges that we're looking to tackle. So please go to nccoe.nist.gov, comment on anything you see on our website. Everything we do follows the same NIST standard, open, transparent process. Everything we do is published for public comment. Send us comments. Everything you can say you really dislike and find the logo that we use to be distasteful because it might look like a body part. It was given to us. But you hate our name, or tell us a little bit more specific and perhaps useful information about some of our collaborative approaches to solving these challenges. I'm going to start with an example and then get back. I usually kind of do, here's what the NCCOE is. We call it the NCCOE 101. I did that last year. Some of you may or may not have heard that talk. I'm going to do a little bit of that, but I'm going to start with an example because it's usually the easiest way to explain what it is we're doing. So we tackle use cases. Our use cases at the NCCOE are driven by the sectors that we work with, these communities of interest. And so I'm going to start by talking about the energy or electric power sector identity and access management use case. So we have some goals. Now, in the identity and access management space, particularly for the electric power sector, there are some interesting and unique challenges. The electric power sector, not unlike any other organization, has lots of employees. A company has the vendors and downstream consumers. All of these are identities that need to be, individuals that need to be authenticated. Access control needs to be addressed, so there are issues of authorization. And then particularly for provisioning and deprovisioning, there's some real challenges that are specific to the sector, which I'm going to get into. And of course, there are a set of goals, but the main one is don't break the grid, right? So we're talking about a space that is a little bit different than the traditional enterprise IT space. Within your standard electric power organization, you have three types of networks, and these are typically really segregated networks. You have physical access control, and that may not be so much a network as a ring of keys that one guy hands to another guy that hands to another guy, right? So not particularly well controlled. You have your traditional enterprise IT network, and then you have something called the OT network, the Operational Technology Network, or ICS, Industrial Control Systems. Often it's referred to as SCADA systems. These are the things that switch power on the grid, that actually make sure that lights stay on, that we have nice recording equipment that can work, that we can give presentations like this one. So if you think about in a traditional enterprise IT environment, what is the failure state? What do we think of as secure? Well, if we're talking about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, in enterprise IT, we really say it's confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? If I log into my bank's website and I get a little notice that says, oh, sorry, we're down for maintenance, please check back in an hour, they're not likely to lose me as a customer, right? But if I get that message from my electric power provider, hey, well, guess what? All the energy just went out of the building, and we'll be back to you in an hour. Now we start to get into a place that's a real concern. So in the enterprise IT world, we think of the failure state as being a rock, right? That's really secure. If I've got this USP key that the government gives you, that's, you know, I think it's iMation now bought Iron Key, but it's a flash drive that if I type the password in 10 times wrong, it becomes a very expensive paperweight. It's not that it wipes, it's not that, you know, it allows me to go through some mechanism to reset my password. It is completely unusable for anyone in the future. That's what we think of as highly secure in the enterprise IT world. In the OT world, it's the opposite, right? It is all about availability. And then integrity, yeah, to the extent that it affects availability. And then confidentiality, yeah, it's a great thing, but it's totally ancillary to availability. So that shifts our paradigm a little bit when we think about how do we implement an identity and access management solution that federates identity across your enterprise, your physical access control, and your OT networks. So a little bit of an eye chart. Let's see if I can get a little pointer up there. So fundamentally, we're talking about building an identity access management solution that allows us to federate across identity stores that are different in each of these networks with a common policy enforcement. And we've actually not drawn on here and should have the resource that someone is getting access to, but that may be a programmable logic controller sitting in a substation, right? There's a lot of great things that are happening in terms of being able to reduce the costs associated with providing low-cost electricity to the world. What used to cause a truck roll is the expression used in this space. You know, guys pile into a truck and they have to go out to a substation and literally flip some switches. We can now do over an SSH session, or more commonly, some kind of telnet session into a piece of OT equipment that has, for the last 50 years, not been network enabled in any way. But look at that, all of a sudden we plug an IP port into it and we've upgraded the technology, and it's great. Fortunately, it's often open telnet ports and connections that have no security, or, you know, the common default password, which is applied across all of the equipment that that same manufacturer uses. So we've got to do better from a security perspective. We've also got to be able to delete employees. We've got to be able to deprovision accounts and have it federate across all this space. So these use cases that I'm talking about are driven by the industry we're hoping to serve. So we sat down with a group of electric power providers, and they shared with us the things that keep them up at night from a security perspective. And this one is one of two that bubbled to the top of the list. And then we followed that NIST process of notice and comment and asked for people to weigh in on it. But we're now out getting ready to build an example of how to address this challenge. And that's what we do at the NCCOE. We bring together the technology community to address a challenge that's been defined and that's been published and refined based on public comment. These are the organizations that have signed up today, signed collaborative research and development agreements with us, and those agreements are pretty simple. You bring us the technology that you think is applicable to this use case. You work with us to help build this end-to-end solution that addresses that challenge, and we go out together and demonstrate to the community that said, hey, we have this problem, that this is one example of how to solve it. Because we are NIST, we're not in a position of endorsing any one of these technologies, but at the same time, we have to build something. And so to build something, you use real technology. So those are some examples of the companies that are working with us on this specific use case. And again, it's all about participation. If you have a technology that you think might fit, go to our website, download the use case, take a look at it, tell us what's wrong with it, tell us where you think you might fit in. We're really excited about this one, which is getting off the ground right now. All right, I'm going to talk very, very quickly about the NCCOE. A few of the previous presenters, Jeremy, Paul, and certainly some of the folks from the pilots talked about the need for demonstrating that this stuff can actually work in the real world. So NIST recognized that there's a gap between our standards development efforts, which are fantastic and drive industry toward greater interoperability, greater security, and providing real world practical ways to actually use the standards that we've put out. There are great commercially available technologies out there that are not in broad enough deployment and use, and there are ways to improve that. We typically think of the barriers to adoption of good security technologies as falling into three buckets. They're educational, technical, and cost, economic. So when we think of creating what we call a reference design, one example of how to solve this thing, something that we've built together with industry, we think of it as serving a purpose of reducing those barriers to adoption, helping CIOs of large energy corporations say, oh, okay, I know which things I need to buy, technologies that help me in these spaces. I know which standards this will map to. It helps me with my compliance activities. Now we can't say, because we are non-regulatory, we can't say do this and it will meet your compliance requirements. Do this and you'll be NERC CIP v5 compliant. But we can work very closely with our colleagues at NERC and FERC to help address and help them understand and get out into the auditing community an understanding of the fact that the technology we're building is really about improving security and addressing those standards. So that's what the NCCOE exists to do. We take a standards-based approach to everything. Modularity is a really core component, and modularity enables a lot of these other things. So when we think of the challenges that we're looking at things that need an end-to-end solution, that are not easily solved by any one existing technology, and where, because of the standards-based approach, you can literally take the technology that we used in our example, you should be able to pull it out and plug in a competitor's technology that meets the same input-output specs. I mean, that's the great thing about standards, right, is that it helps improve the efficacy of the marketplace. So we will work with the specific technology, and we'll provide in that reference design a complete bill of materials, as well as all of the information, the standards that we map to, the configuration settings for each specific product, any of the glue code that needs to exist in between those products is all part of that reference design, so that you can, in good science standard fashion, repeatable, you can go take the reference design that we've built and deploy it in your environment and see that you can meet the same requirements that we've met. Now, that's great. In reality, you've got, if you're a large energy company, you've got an installed technology base. So you have technology that you already have to work with, and that's why it's really essential that the commercially available technologies we work with meet whatever standard input-output interfaces exist today and align to a set of standards. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Usability, I always get on a soapbox, and I realize now I'm the third or fourth person to get on a soapbox today when it comes to usability, but I have this, I love telling this story, so if you've heard me before, I apologize. But so when I started this job, we do work in energy and healthcare, financial services, and the chief of neurosurgery at a really big hospital system came to me and he said, I've got this app on my phone, it's awesome. I was really excited to hear about your new job. You have to see this thing. It allows me to securely connect into our hospital. My residents can send me information. So he's a neurosurgeon, and he says, and I can even review MRIs. And he tries to pull one up, and he kind of puts it down on the desk, and I said, all right, well, what's happening? Oh, he said, oh, it's rendering. It takes, 5 minutes to render. And I said, well, why is that? He said, well, because it's encrypted. It takes forever. I said, oh, okay, is that how you use it? And he said, oh, no, you've got to be kidding. My residents, they take a picture of the MRI on the screen, and they send it to me in the SMS, so clear. So, I mean, usability is not just from a user's perspective. We can't break a business process either, right? So there's that as an essential sort of core component. We did this at NIST. They gave us these, they moved to iPhones, right? So you can say what you want about RIM and whether or not it's going to survive and whether or not it should survive with the US government as its primary customer. But they gave us these iPhones instead, and so it had that, the password swipe feature. And then all of a sudden, one day, they pushed out policy that said, you can no longer use the password swipe. So some of you may have seen there was a security concern about being able to hack the fingerprint reader. So it stopped working immediately. They pushed out policy, it immediately stopped working. So what did everyone I know do? Well, it's a very long and complex password you have to type in. So everyone I know went into the settings, and any setting they could change to make the password timeout longer, they did. So now instead of having it time out after 3 seconds but allow me to use my thumbprint, it times out after 10 or 15 minutes, depending on what I can set. So we kind of have broken this sense of just because we're security people and we want to improve security doesn't mean that we're improving what we like to call realized security. So it's a concept that some people at the center came up with, that realized security is really a function of the set of security controls we've implemented and the usability that you get out of good security technologies. Or you could rewrite that as realized security is equal to the security you get out of security controls minus the lack of usability that those controls provide. And unfortunately, that's more often the case. All right, so like I said, we're looking at challenges that are broadly relevant to a specific sector. We're looking at challenges that are of national concern, and those are challenges that are typically brought to us. So when people say, well, why is identity and access management the main thing that you guys started focusing on in the energy sector? The answer is simple. It's because that's what the energy sector said they cared about. We also tackle, so those are our use cases, we also tackle what we refer to as building blocks. And these are technology-driven challenges rather than sector-driven challenges. And those are typically a little lower level. We do some work in various different activities that cut across sectors. So that would be software asset management, mobile device security, trusted cloud. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing in attribute-based access control after this. So again, use cases are sector specific, building blocks are really technology driven. I'm going to actually skip over our business model slides in the interest of time, but effectively the core component, the takeaway here is it's all about collaboration. We work with the industry to define the challenge, we work with the technology community to build something. At this point, we leave this slide in so that you can, if you have, I don't know, if you have trouble sleeping at night, you can go download these slides and take a look at them. In addition to having an open call to anyone in the technology community who has a relevant technology to address one of our challenges, we also have these core companies, these core partners who have participated with us and are participating with us across many of the use cases. So they've agreed to have a persistent presence at the center, they signed an MOU with us, and they work collaboratively with us across multiple use cases and building blocks. There are 19 of them today, though this list continues to grow. All right, a little bit on attribute-based access control. We're looking at it from the perspective of, again, these need to be narrowly defined challenges so that we can build an actual reference design. So we're looking at it from the perspective of an organization to organization federation, right? So how can a doctor show up in a region that's experiencing, let's say, a pandemic, a need for real healthcare professionals, and do better than, hey, I'm a doctor and here's my credential, it's got my picture on it, and it says that I am both a doctor and work at a hospital you may or may not have heard of before. Right? That's the extent that we can validate someone today. How can we do better than that? How can we, in the case of, we also talk about line crews working on an area that has had a major natural disaster and needs to restore power. Today, line crews come from all over the country to support getting power back on in that region. And the best they can do is say, yeah, this guy, he showed up and says he knows how to climb a pole. We're going to let him up there and start messing with high power lines. That's something that we need to do better when it comes to. And so we're looking at how do groups sign up to some type of a brokerage to allow for the exchange of identity where there is a need for authentication in addition to authorization, and where there's no prior knowledge of that specific individual. So this is the, I'm going to skip for a second to the slide that we kind of talk about that. An unauthenticated subject comes in. This is the RP, so in this case that would be the hospital experiencing a drastic need. But we're talking about more than access to a web application, right? We're talking about access to the entire hospital set of systems, right? To logging patient data, to access to medical devices. So how do we do that? How do we get an individual into that environment? And here we're talking about a whole set of attributes that need to be exchanged. And there's still some open questions here. So we're working through this. You're going to actually, I'll go back in a second and share with you some information that's new that is going to be published in the coming weeks. But there's an opportunity to participate in this activity today. We've got a good organization, a good group of companies that come, and we have a monthly call. It's open to anyone who'd like to participate. But one example of a question that we're still trying to solve is, does the RP need to know any of the actual attribute values, or is the RP really just looking for a yes or no to a series of questions? Is Nate Lesser a cardiothoracic surgeon? They don't need to know what type of doctor is Nate Lesser. They need to know, is Nate Lesser a cardiothoracic surgeon? And what type of frequency does this kind of question need to be asked? Do we create a shadow account within the RP, or do we say, okay, we're going to go out to the exchange, we're going to go out to that brokerage every time we want to allow Nate access to something else within our environment? Those are all real world questions that we need to start thinking about. I'm going to skip back just very quickly to look at this slide, and I guess you can't really read it. Based on other documentation from across the government and the private sector, we've put together this thing which really looks at workflow of registration, credential creation, and token issuance, and attribute provisioning. I think of this generally as identity provisioning, though I get in trouble when I use that expression. Then this is authorization, and authentication happens up here. This workflow is going to be published for public comment. It's based on definitions from these organizations. The NCCOE here, this is an important kind of example. When we define things for ourselves, we know we're in a place of, hey, you shouldn't be doing this, right? So we know we're in a place of, we're getting ourselves in a little trouble. There are, of the 36 terms that need definition in the previous slide, 2 of them we couldn't find in one of these other documents. Now, some of these documents have conflicting definitions for them. Some of these documents, even from the federal government, have conflicting definitions, and this is where our work ties back in very closely with Paul's, and we're really excited to have him as a new resource to work with across NIST, to be able to say, hey, look, the NCCOE had to define a couple of terms. We didn't want to, but we had to because we had to build something. And you guys see this in the private sector all the time. Well, I'd like to do this standards-based thing, and I tried to, and I got as far as I could, but it only carried me so far. So there's a practical concern at the end of the day that you actually have to get something done. And so we'd go out and do that, yet have that great feedback loop into the standards community to say, here's where we fell a little short in terms of our adoption of standards and could use your help in getting this worked into the standards process. All right. Please, please, please participate. Come check out our website, download the documents, send us comments, tell us what you like, tell us really what you don't like, and I guess we're saving questions, right? All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So one last presentation before we get to lunch. So our last 2 speakers, Nate and Paul, have talked a lot about things that NIST is doing primarily on the technical side, but as we talked about in the first 2 sessions, a lot of the challenges on the identity ecosystem are coming up with interoperability, not only on the technical side, but also interoperability of policies, of business rules. This is where the work of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group really plays an important role, and I'm really glad, since some of you on the agenda may have seen Kim Little was supposed to be here from LexisNexis. She had a family emergency and had to stay back in Atlanta. So Ian was gracious enough to pinch hit, and well, you guys know Ian, so I'll let him talk.
Okay. Yeah, let's make that work. So a quick explanation about this deck. It looks like crap. The slides that look like crap are mine. The ones that look good are the IDESGs. Also, another thing about these slides that are a little weird is that I have 3 titles. This is not some sort of self-aggrandizing moment on my part. It's just, it gets complicated, and here's why. I am a member of the Management Council of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group. We also are now a 501(c) non-for-profit organization on which I am the board of directors. And I also have a day job, and my boss is not here right now, which is good, and I work for Salesforce. So before we talk about what the IDESG actually does, let's talk about why we have this strategy in the first place. This is what you're about to see, completely unofficial, and Jeremy's office does not bless it in any way, shape, or form. When NSTIC was released, and where it lives now is very important. It lives in the Department of Commerce. That's where NIST is, right? And despite anyone's political leanings, White House wasn't dumb about this, in the sense that we know the internet is one of the most major engines of our economy. And one of the ways we actually unlock more value from that engine is if we tackle some of the problems that we have with identity head on. And we do this because there is an inevitability about how much we do in person and in paper chasing business processes that are going to move online. And if we simply adopt, we forklift what we've done to what we should be doing, we're not going to get the same value out of the process. We're going to be saddled with the same old problems in a new setting, and that's going to hamper economic growth. So we have to address that. And one of the other things is, no matter what your business mission is, you want to be able to reach a larger audience. Now that may be more partners, that may be more students, that may be more citizens, that may be more just retail customers. Doesn't matter. You want to grow whatever that thing is. In theory, the internet and mobile computing and a variety of other things gives you that opportunity, but you can't just do that blindly, because what ends up happening is, well, you have problems of identity that have to get resolved, and you're out by your lonesome trying to resolve them. That doesn't seem like a good proposition, so let's see how we fix that. Now, a lot of people, both in this room and other rooms, have been talking about how passwords are broken. Tuesday, I'm going to propose another approach to this, but okay, so we know passwords are broken. More interestingly to most of the people in this room is a problem of verifiability. Verifying identities, knowing that this is the same Mickey Mouse that I saw on my website before, that's a real fundamental business problem. Because it means I can't move up the value chain in my transactions with, let's say, Mickey Mouse, because I'm not sure it's the same one again. Or I'm not sure that Mickey Mouse happens to be active military or a student. See, I can't make my interactions with whoever I want to interact with more valuable until I get some degree of verification. Some degree this is the same person I've been working with. The other problem is that what we have today is sort of, I mean, it works, right? Clearly it works. All of us at our own capacities are working online, engaging with our constituents, our customers, our partners. We're doing okay about it. It's not great though. It's not great from an individual perspective because I end up forking over a ton of data and I don't get to monetize that. I really don't have a share in that conversation. I don't have a share in the monetization. And as a business, this is a really shady market. I don't have predictability about what my risks are for using identity data. I don't really have predictability about how I'm going to get that data and how I'm going to consume it. And so if I don't have predictability, I can't put risk against it. If I can't put risk against it, it's really hard to go to my boss and say, I want some dollars to go do this initiative. And the first question is going to be asked, yeah, well, so like, what's the downside risk here? And you'll go, it's unpredictable. I don't like that in business. We want some predictability about these things. And so if we're eventually going to move more and more things online anyway, there's an inevitability about that. I have a problem in thinking that our status quo reasonably functional approach is just going to get inherited into a default state. I think there's something we can do better, and I think we all know it from a personal level, and I think we all see it too from our business mission. So what actually is the IDESG? So the strategy called for this creation of a body. What are we? Well, so essentially we are the private sector side of the NSTIC mission. The strategy document said we need to stand up a private sector-led organization to actually carry out the work, build an identity ecosystem framework, a modular set of components that can help all constituents address identity challenges, and of course adhering to the NSTIC principles. So I think the thing that's most important as we are working through how we talk about the IDESG, how we market it, how we describe our mission, I think the easiest way to think about it is we have plenty of organizations that work on standards, and they do great work. We have plenty of really smart people that work on standards or in industry trying to make these things go where the rubber meets the road, like actually do this stuff. What we don't have is a room for everybody to get into together. Because, you know, standards dorks like me don't often get a chance to sit down with someone like Lance and talk about what is actually a life sciences problem that our standard really needs to solve. We have sort of layers of obfuscation between us. So IDESG can be viewed as a place to bring all of these different and important constituents together for the same goal, which is how we address these identity problems online. One of the things that we have in our to-do list is to really build out this framework. And the idea is that the IDESG is not a standards body. We're not going to be creating standards at IDESG. No. What we will do is saying, look, if you take SCIM over here and you take OpenID Connect with this profile, you can build something that adheres to the principles of NSTIC, and then it can actually be usable today, or in 6 months, or in 9 months. So we're going to be looking at different architectures, different standards, holding those up against use cases that we're constructing and we're soliciting input on, and see where the gaps are. And then go back and say, you know, Joni, it would be really great at Kantara if you guys could work on this problem because no one seems to be doing it and everyone sees this as a gap, as a for instance example. So the way we're structured is we have the plenary. This is the most important part because this is everybody. Right now, Kim is chair of the plenary. We meet 4 or 5 times a year. We have a plenary coming up. We'll talk about that in a second. And this is where all of you can come and not only hear what's happening, but be more active than that. Actually have a hand in shaping what we want to produce to help the engine of the economy, to help internet identity. And we also have management council / board of directors. That's me and some other people that you probably have worked with in industry. Folks like Jack Seuss from Internet 2. We've got Matt from IDME. So we have an interesting representation of people. And our job really is to look at what's going on and say, wow, we really need to crank this more. We need to produce more here to say, build out the framework. Or as Jim is leading, how do we give tools to the plenary to talk about problems of identity? How do we arm them with ways to go to their business and say, you know, it'd be really good not only to participate, but what we want to do is use federated identity because we don't want to be holding a bag of passwords, which is just a bag of toxic waste. So those are the kinds of things the management council does. What are we doing? The goal we have, the big goal for this year is actually build the first version of an identity ecosystem framework. Actually put out the scaffolding on which we will hang existing solutions and where we will point to and say we've got holes, where we've got to get better, we've got to do more as an industry. The idea is that by building the IEF out, we set ourselves up for, in a future state, some form of certification or accreditation. There's talk around a trust mark process, essentially saying, how do I know that such and such RP has good practices? You know, what's that good housekeeping seal of approval for identity? Don't really have one. We've got smatterings here and there, some things that happen in trustee, for example. I can sort of use 5CAM proved identity provider mark and sort of say, well, okay, there's some of that there. But how do we make it easier for every business to know that the people they're interacting with have good identity practices and are using the right kinds of technology? So the framework is going to have a variety of components in it, and we're sort of tackling each of these in pieces. I think the one that has probably the most interest from forward-leading businesses who are dealing with online identity is the middle one. It's the risk model. Because right now, you don't really know, except unless you have a point-to-point contract, if I take some attributes from someone and I make a business decision based on those attributes and something goes wrong, who's left to clean up the mess? Who had a duty of care? What was that duty? And is there actually liability? And not having a sort of regular, predictable risk model makes it really hard for our businesses to actually engage in these things. It ends up becoming lawyer-palooza, because the way I do it is I'll sign an agreement with Bob, and then Bob will sign it with Doug. And this is highly inefficient. Not to mention, it is shifting the conversation from how do we achieve our business mission to how do we keep the lawyers fed? And that's not necessarily one that we all want to engage with. So one of the things I mentioned was use cases. Kathy Tilton from Day On is chairing an effort to build out a series of use cases that should be used as a beginning for the mirror to hold up against the framework. And we have all sorts of use cases in this document. It's publicly available, and that's an important point. Everything we do at IDESG is publicly available. So you can see our proceedings, you can see all the presentations from Plenary, you can see the use case documents. But this is an important body of work that's going to be a living document. Right? We're getting more use cases, we're trying to compile them, but we need more. We'll talk about that. So the thing that we're looking at is we're breaking apart as many of the aspects of dealing with identity in an online environment as we can and getting down to their core components. And you can see a variety of these here. Now these are the technical side of things. You still have the parallel effort to describe risk, to describe sort of business operations and conditions around that. But these are the places that we're starting to look to say, what's on the shelf? Where have we built things as an industry? What's missing? Is there something we can emulate, let's say, in UK IDAP? Or maybe the Waif Federation's got some nice bits we can pick up and use here. So trying to see what plugs in, what's missing. So lastly, the call to action, the ask. So why actually get involved with this organization? It's not because you love to travel once a quarter to places that are maybe in the path of hurricanes this September during hurricane season. It's not that. The reason is this is a really interesting opportunity to actually get involved in a very different way. Some of you may have been involved in identity standards work in the past. This is a different feel to it, because this now has the feel of the responsibility of making business successful. It is closely married. It's not just, hey, should we have angle brackets or mustache braces in this standard? It's about what do we need to actually perform our business mission. That's a really rare opportunity. And it is a great way actually to grow your business, because you can meet people who represent constituencies. So you can meet Matt, he'll say, look, if you want to serve active military, I've got a great way it does it that adheres to the NSTIC principles. You say, well, yeah, this is perfect for the new initiative we have. So you actually get to grow your business. So why am I involved? I am absolutely a bag of anti-patterns. I've seen every disastrous way to do something, and I figure it would probably be good, it's supposed to be a collector of anti-patterns, to actually share those to make sure we don't do it again. But the thing is, even when I was an analyst, when I was previously in industry, I had a feeling like this identity stuff presents an absolutely amazing opportunity to do something totally different. But I couldn't tell what all of the sides were of it. It was a big, complex object, but I could feel there's something there. And I don't think in an industry you get a chance to make this much change on this much scale very often. So at the end of the day, the reason why I am involved, the reason why I'm bringing my organization along to be involved, is because I want to know I helped. Right? I don't believe that the status quo though it's effective, it's not the best it can be. I'd like to know I helped to make it better. So how can you get involved? Not surprisingly, there's a website, there's lots of information, there's forms and stuff you can read, there's all of our proceedings. Go check out idecosystem.org, that's number one. You can join, it's pretty painless. There's like 4 attributes you have to cough up. You're okay with them, it's, like email address. You'll be fine, trust me, you'll survive. And you can do federated sign-on into it, which is quite nice, thanks to our friends at Ping. And you can talk to representatives. There's actually a bunch of members from the Management Council who are here. There's a bunch of members who are here. As well as get a sense for the committees that are there and the work we're doing and dig in more. But I think the best way to do it is come join us for our 10th plenary. It's hard to believe it's our 10th, in Tampa in September. It's an opportunity to hear what each committee is doing, but more importantly, most importantly, is shape our roadmap for the coming year. Tell us, tell yourselves, these are the things we want to accomplish. These are the short-term goals. This is how we're going to get there. So this is a real rare organization in that regard. Come to Tampa in September. It's the easiest way to get involved. And with that, I'll leave you with a couple more just info slides. I'm sure the good folks at Ping will give us a way for us to download all of these. Let's do some Q&A. We did everyone? All right.
So it is noon, but I don't think anybody's picking us out if you can take a few minutes to hang around. So who's got questions for Ian or anything? Yes, sir.
So it's a good question. And if you didn't hear it, it's, we're not, IDESG is not doing standards, so who's going to be? And it's not just one. So we have great work happening in IETF this very week to hopefully get us to an internet draft for SCIM, as a for instance. We have OIDF working on the open identity standards. We have the Jose stack coming out of IETF. We still have XACML in OASIS. All of the usual players for standards work will continue to do their thing. And what IDESG will do is sort of run a filament through them to connect them and say, this is a collection of standards in a certain use case we believe to be effective, or we bless as a sort of approved approach. So we don't want to create yet another standards body, because there's plenty of those. We want to harness the work that comes out of all of them.
Can I add to that? Is this on? I sit on some of the committees as well, and I mentioned this in my brief. Our pilots came to us and said, we have a gap, we have a business need that needs a standard, and on behalf of the pilots that are really here to innovate and espouse the guiding principles, we want you to look at our proposal, bless it, and submit it to STOs. So we're in the process of, hopefully by Thursday of this week, putting forward our first proposal to the standards development organizations to address a gap in the market. So we're advocating for our pilots, we're advocating for this ecosystem to fill those voids that standards can help.
Do I get credit for being creative enough to hire him?
Yep. So part of the answer to that, the simplest part of that is, we don't know yet. We really don't, in the sense that as we talk about what the best practices, what practices look like before we start labeling them best or not, is just beginning. How then we want to represent that you're using this collection of capabilities and that gets you this sort of seal. We haven't talked about that translation yet. So if you have ideas, come and bring those. That's point one. Point two is, there's a flip side to your question, which is, I'm a mom and pop shop. Where the heck do I start if I've been told passwords are bad and I don't want to hold them? All right, well, what's next? Like, how do I get into being a good participant? And I think this is one of the roles that IDESG has to play, and has to play through outreach, is to say, here's practices that you as a mom and pop shop can take. Now you happen to get the seal because you use them, but that's not important. What's important is you've done the right things by your customers. And the last thing is, Bob has a horrifying presentation on knowing what's in your identity hot dog, that if Bob, it's still available, yeah, it does address this problem as well, Bob.
So from the government side, this is something that I think Congress and the administration have struggled with quite a bit, and the answer is no, we're not regulating. Now there are, well, NIST, let me be clear, NIST is a non-regulatory agency. We do put out standards and best practices that some organizations can follow. There are agencies that are regulated that have regulators. I mean, for example, Bob's at Citi, and he has bank examiners coming in who are going to do audits on a whole variety of things, including their security protocols. But nobody's calling for new regulation of essentially industries that aren't regulated specifically for cybersecurity. On a more macro cybersecurity level, I talked in my session about the NIST cybersecurity framework that was published back in February, and it's specifically focused on critical infrastructure, although I'd suggest it's a set of guidelines that can actually work very well for pretty much any industry, but it was the focus of a specific executive order the president put it looking at critical infrastructure where there is a lot of regulation. So, you know, it's out there as something that's voluntary, that much like the identity ecosystem framework we're trying to develop was developed through a multi-stakeholder process with industry. And, you know, the real question, I think there's, you know, two that comes from it. One, you know, do some regulators pick it up? Well, I think what we're seeing more of right now is companies looking at it and saying, now that this is out there, we have a duty, we think, to actually start to embrace this. But I think they're worried on their own side if something's out there that they're not following in terms of best practices. One thing we're also trying to do with the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence is basically translate some of these things that are more high-level guidelines or theory into specific reference implementations that are digestible, that any organization can pull off the shelf and, you know, come up with architectures for solutions that aren't product dependent, but that you can pick, you know, a variety of different things and plug them in, and they should work to help.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that quickly, so I agree with what Bob said, although we do make sort of relativistic determinations of goodness, right? So if you look at the framework, it has tiers, right? So we do say this approach or this process is better than that one, even if we don't say it's solely applicable to this specific use case, or it should be driven by anyone who is trying to do X, Y, and Z. But we do at times make those sort of relative determinations as to better.
Vice Chair of the Plenary, Andrew.
Brett?
Yeah, I have a lot of answers to that, and forgive me if they're not all NIST friendly, but here, of course, I go back to what I said earlier. We don't want to have RFIs and workshops for the sake of RFIs and workshops, so there's, to some extent, we may just make an update and put it out there for comment. IDESG is a good way to participate, so as you're pushing things on the IDESG path, we can consume them on the 863 path. And heck, unsolicited proposals or responses to us. Anything on this?
Call
Call.
or email or
Yeah.
tweet. Tweets ineffective sometimes. It's hard to communicate much in 140 characters, but reach out.
So I'm the only guy, I think, in the room wearing a suit, so I'm going to answer a different question that you didn't ask. I mentioned the feedback loop that we have into the standards community. We also have a feedback loop into the technology community. So if we go out and we say, all right, we're going to tackle this challenge, industry said they need an answer to this, they need a way, an example of how to build something, and we discover, hey, look, we're missing a key component. The commercially available technologies that are out there today just don't address this. That's a great opportunity for us to say and publish to the technology community, guys, go build this, and you've got a customer base waiting for it. But to actually answer your question, yeah, come on, we're thrilled. We are consumers of standards. So we have that feedback loop, and certainly we do it through all of the NIST channels into the standards development organizations. So that's as a part of NIST, we work with our colleagues across the IT laboratory there, all of whom sit on a number of those boards, IETF, ISO, ANSI, so on and so forth. But if you are not getting NIST representation in the standards development efforts, or if you have something that's applicable that just hasn't made its way into one of our use cases, please pick up the phone and tell us.
For IDESG, what we need most, well, you can think of us sort of like a startup, and we've gone through most of our angel funding, and we have the framework in place to produce something awesome. But there's 10 different awesome things we can produce. What IDESG needs right now is radical prioritization, and that can only come by through participation, where people can say, of the 10 awesome things we know we want to do, this is the 2 we're going to do this year. And maybe it's just a portion of the framework. For example, the plenary says, this is what we're going to focus on. But what we need is to prioritize, and that comes from participation.
And to your question, how are we going to know when we're done? Well, for starters, I don't think version 1 means we're done. And so I think we're definitely couching it as this is a first step towards something bigger. But I think we know that we've done something that hits the mark if we come up with something. And, Ian was talking before, the initial focuses and how do you have a framework that organizations can self-attest to. So if we can come up with something that's, both meaningful enough and lightweight enough that firms like IDMe or Salesforce or Citi or others in the room can look at this and say, we can do this, we can self-attest to that, and it has some value in the marketplace, I think that means we actually hit the mark on this thing. But the plan, I think, is we won't get it all right the first time, and we're going to have to iterate on it, and that's going to require, more work to get into something that I think is a little bit more robust. Other questions? Yeah. reason I'm wearing this shirt, and there's a reason I wear it around the office sometimes, is to communicate that point. It's a good one, but I'd say we're actually making progress. In fact, the whole focus of having half of this workshop being focused on Ain't No Party Like a Relying Party was to drive home. There's actually some great examples of things that are going on. And, one, like the broader, challenge of the framework, you're not going to solve it overnight. But when you look at what IDESG is doing with veterans and first responders and other, affinity groups, what AARP is looking at doing for its members, what we've been able to do, Broadridge, who basically does communications for every brokerage in the U.S., they're all coming here today to say there's actually value in this federation concept, and they're starting to do some things. I've always viewed this as a chicken and egg problem, where it's quite obvious. Why, as a consumer, would I get a credential if I can only use it at one of the 27 sites I go to? And why would the other 26 sites bother to integrate with it if there's only 10,000 people holding it? A lot of what we tried to do with our pilots is basically fund some chickens and some eggs. And the idea is that the good ones are going to do what healthy chickens do and reproduce. And over a couple years, as others start to fold in, here's where the metaphor gets taken a little too far, but you get a poultry industry. So, you have to start somewhere. What? Come on.
Yeah. And, okay, hold on. Jeremy, one other way to look at it is, for 20 years, the identity community has led with specs in the conversation. We've never led with a business case. We've never pointed to someone like Broadridge and said, we're reducing cost and we're increasing the size of the market through identity. We never really had a concrete, oh, that? Yeah, my business wants to do. We're just getting to that point. So, to Jeremy's point, some of the pilots are not going to make it out. Some are going to make it out, and they're going to be use cases that other people go, if I squint, I see my business in this. That's different than before. So me, as someone who is a management council who's part of Plenary, I'm focused on what are those business cases we can package up, those use cases we package up, and hand to you as a technology provider, to you as a business, and say, I think you can carry this to management and actually grow your business, grow your mission.
Other questions? All right, well, thanks. You guys have been a great
Thanks, everybody.
audience. 20 minutes.